Alright, so we finally get to put some product on a panel. Following on from the last episode, I had Terry and Trev here, so we've been able to shoot this while they were here, so I'm just going to go through a few things now. The product that we're using is this DP616 in the Deltron range. Now people have heard me spruiking about the Vibrance one. It's the same product that's labelled because PPG have quite a few different ranges. So you'll see me now using the 616. It's the same product that's in the Vibrance range. So it's an epoxy urethane primer, and what we're going to do today is put it on. The first thing is mixing. Now, if you don't have a set of scales, I'm fortunate I have a set of scales here that with a computer system. When you mix it, get yourself, this one's just a generic, so it's got the mix rates written on it, which you take off your data sheet. The problem is if you're using a stick and the cup's got a taper, then the stick won't be correct. And if you're just sort of guessing, it's not good. And tell us a bit about, Trevor, why it's not good, just have a bit of a guess.
Well, same thing, if you've got the vessel like that you're saying, where it's like on an angle, so if you've got the stick that's in there, you'll virtually have the right amount of base volume. Then as you start to get further up, you'll start to put too much hardness, so it's over-activated. And then as you get further up again, you start getting too much thinner.
And then that obviously creates its own problems.
That takes away from the integrity of the product, starts making the product thinner, so you don't achieve film builds.
Yep.
Takes away all the adhesion promoters out of there.
So we're using a disposable cup. So in the industry, these are used because they save on time and also cleaning product, and then you've got to dispose of the cleaning product. So these cups are designed to be thrown away. If you're using a normal cup, then you need to mix in something like this, or a measuring cup, or this style of thing. These here, even for home, I think they're worth looking at and considering whether you should use that rather than trying to clean the gun and clean the pot all the time. And one of the advantages with these is different sizes, but when you're using those, you can also do this little trick, which I've seen someone do, no one told me about it. You can actually bend the cup and it will stay there. So if you're up under something or sideways, you can actually bend the cup. So they're the SATA ones, which is what we use. Make sure that you're using your mask with the right gas rated cartridges. You'll see a lot of people like up at PPG at the training centre, you guys use a full hood.
We run air-fed hoods, yeah. Any products we touch with any isocyanates or anything like that, it's an air-fed mask.
Yeah, so I'm not in a position that I have all of that available to me, so I've been using a mask for a long time. I don't do it every day, so if I was doing it every day, I would make sure I had a hood. Is that the right terminology?
Yeah, air-fed hood. Yep.
An air-filled hood.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit now. So we've mixed this on the computer, and pretty much we've worked out roughly about 400 mil to do both sides with 2 coats. Just tell us a little bit about the gun we're using, Trev, and also...
Yeah, so the gun we're going to use, so that's the RP100B. These are designed for primer. They come in a range anything from a 1.2, 1.3, gets up to 2 mil, so depending on what product we're using. Yep. To what we're going to use it for. We're going to run the 1.8, I think. Or 1.8, yeah.
I think Terry's got a 1.8 out.
Yeah, 1.8 for the epoxy urethane. Yep. Yeah.
So the one, obviously the 1.3, it's millimetres, and that changes basically the atomisation of the paint.
Atomisation, the amount of flow that comes out.
The amount that's coming through.
Yep.
So I would normally use a 1.8, and then if I'm trying to do a nice finish coat, I might go back to a 1.4, just so it looks a bit finer and a bit flatter, because I don't need to build as much.
Yep.
But clearly what we're after here is sufficient build. So it's 2 coats.
2 coats of the epoxy urethane.
Yep. So the first one, is that just a solid coat, or is it a bit lighter or heavier?
That's like a nice medium coat, so there'll be 2 medium coats.
Yep.
We don't want to sort of go bashing it on like a lot of painters will say. I just smash it all on.
Yep.
Virtually what we want to do with these things is if we can control the gun, control the application, we're going to achieve a film build.
Right.
So most important is film build.
Okay. So it's all about how much and how thick
that product's going on there.
Enough to stick. and not too much that it's not designed to do that.
Yeah, so if you overload a product, it can go into other issues.
Something I don't think a lot of people would think about with this is that if you're using it in a spray booth with a heater, this stuff's not to be baked, is it?
Definitely don't bake it.
Yeah, you know, people trying to push the envelope time-wise. This product's designed, it's got a flash-off time in the data sheet, and the idea is you should stick to those. I used to have an egg timer on the wall of the booth because you always think, 10 minutes. And if you if you set your stopwatch on your phone or whatever and come back when you think it's 10 minutes, it's about 3.
Yes.
So you really do need to time it, and you can't just look at it and go, oh, it's matted off, it'll be fine.
Yeah, you still need to give it that
it's a time.
period.
It's a time thing. Temperature-wise, what would you think's the minimum we should be looking at?
Ultimately, you want around about 25 metal temp.
Yep.
So it's not really ambient temp, it's got to be metal temp. That relies a lot more on the product to cure properly.
Yep. So I see one of those things that if you prep everything the night before, for instance, if you're at home or whatever, and you come out in the morning, fresh Saturday morning, and you think, right, I'm going to hit it, even if you warm up the room, the metal's still cold.
Still cold, exactly right.
So I've always tried to make sure I keep myself at about 22, but obviously even a bit more than that would be better.
Yeah, you don't want to go too much more than that. So most of our testing and all the stuff with our products is based off a 25-degree metal temp.
Okay, so think about the temp. You know, don't do it late at night, early in the morning when it's freezing cold, unless you've got some way of controlling the temperature. You can do that with things like cigar heaters and those sorts of things, provided you don't have a naked flame running while you're painting, otherwise you're going to end up taking the roof off. So there's all those things to think about, but make sure, especially that it's not touch to cold, like cold to touch.
Cold to touch, exactly right.
And then that will help with the process, and make sure you got your flash offs right. We will get into more depths as we go into more primers and overlaying products, but we'll probably jump in now and get Terry to suit up and get the mask on, and we'll watch him put some paint on and just test out if he really looks like he knows what he's doing. Part of the process with most of these cars is to add some metal onto the edge of the panels to get the gap alignment a lot better. So Adam's at Perry's garage has done some of that, and you can see here with that steel ruler just how much the heat has pulled that down, and I spoke to him about it and said just to leave it, and when it got here I would sort that out. So I'm just going to take a dolly and put it on this side, so a nice flat dolly with some nice round edges on it. And I'm going to put that on this back edge like that, and then I'm going to hit the other side with a nice solid hammer that's got the same deal, nice rounded edges. So I'm going to use a hammer that's got some nice rounded edges like that. And I'm just going to apply that to the back. So this has had a door skin on it as well, so that'll actually tighten that back of that door skin up as well. So I'm on my own, so I'm going to have to set the camera up somewhere, and I'll flip that over and get into it. That's taken about half of it out. Righto, so you can see there now, that's really good there. It's got about 2 mil. And on this ridge, just on this point here, it probably needs a little bit more as well. And this bottom corner is sitting out as well. Now if this was actually on the car and you put a slide hammer under here, and I've done it before, you put the slide hammer under the back and pull on it, what happens is it pulls this and pushes that down. And the reason for that is the welding has actually shrunk that metal, pulled it down, and what I'm doing with the hammer is to stretch the metal back out to make this long back to where it should be so that it comes up and you get that nice flat surface. So when you put your ruler on, it's flat all the way through. You don't end up with a big dip here that you've got to fill up with filler. So that's pretty close now. I'll just mess around with that a little bit after we get off the camera. It's been a privilege to have worked for so many years with PPG. With their help over the last 25 years, we've been able to come up with some of the best paint in Australia. And I can say that from experience, having worked on things like Tailspin and also Boss XC, working with these guys to actually come up with the sort of finish we need on some of the cars that you can see there. Whether that's with their help or on my own, we've achieved some unbelievable results with such a great product. Thank you, PPG. So there you go, I've just run the TIG over that, put a little bit of filler wire on as well, and now I can just sand that up and that'll give me a nice round corner. Plenty of meat in behind it. So there we go, it's all looking nice now. So all I've got to do now is put these little dents in here that I was talking about in the last episode, so I'll do that next. Righto, so I'm just tackling these insets for the clips. So I've worked out a way to do it, and it's pretty basic, but got a big shifter, clamp it in position underneath, and then I've just been using one of my chisels, if I can find it. Oh, it's fun trying to film and work at the same time. Oh, here it is. So one of my chisels. So I've got quite a few cold chisels that I've rounded the cutting point off so that I can use them for my panel beating. And what I'm doing is just putting that in there next to the jaw of the, get the camera in the right place. So I've just been putting that in position next to the jaw of the shifter, and then giving it a couple of whacks, and we end up with a nice indent like that. Just thought I'd give you a little snippet of what we're doing. So I'm trying to get all this ready to go into epoxy. Before I could do that, we've done a lot of work to this, welded through here. I've taken the holes, welded the holes up in here and put the line back in. It's really not what this show's all about, it's about paint, but I needed to get this sort of stuff done. So we're just working on the bottom section of that, and I wanted to show you that. So I'll go out the back, but as you come through, you'll see that all of these parts now are being sanded, filed, chasing out all the little bits and pieces, doing the edges, cleaning all the backs up. So it's sort of a lot of grunt work that's got to be done to enable you to get it ready so that we can actually put that epoxy on. So it all needs to be super cleaned up, and then we'll do that with the deoxidine before we put the epoxy on. And then out the back here, to get this nose cone to fit, we really had problems, and I think I might have showed you before, we'd cut this side to bring it in tighter. On the bottom here, we just couldn't get it to fit, so we've actually cut through the panel and put nearly 10 mil in it. So from nothing to 10 mil, and then a slice through here. So that's all tacked in place now, ready to be tigged up. So we'll tig that up, put it back on, do a final trial fit of that, and then it can come off, be cleaned up, and then we can start putting all these parts into epoxy. I'm just trying to finalise these doors before I put them in epoxy. Now, one of the things about doing this is obviously you can put filler in, you know, high build primers, all that sort of stuff, but it's about finding the problems you've got, and I could feel that I had clearly a dent here, but the easiest way to find those is if you grab your files, so just a normal file, and I'll talk to you about different files in a minute, and pretty much sit that flat on the panel and just slide it along like that. What it's going to do is pick up your highs and lows. So you can see like a bit of a line there, there's some sort of ridge probably within the pressing of the panel, but these ones here are clearly dents, so it could be as simple as, you can see that moving, well there's a good example there. So when it's been handled or the skin being put on, for some reason it's either been, you know, on the stand or someone leaning on it, or it might have been dropped, it's actually put some lows in it. Now what I'm going to do with that is I can't get access, there's a double panel that comes right up to here. I'm going to put a couple of pins in it and pull it out. You can sort of put a spoon in from the back and try and push it up. They're not overly deep, but I'd prefer not to have the filler in there if I can help it. But what I wanted to show you is by using the file, you can find the problems. Now up here, where all this work is here, when Adam's put the skin on and then he's done some welding, things weren't fitting up the way he wanted, and he's manipulated the panel a bit, and that looks worse than it is. But I've now run the file over it, I've pulled up some lows, and if I put my steel ruler on it, it's all within 1 millimetre now. So once I sand that up, it'll look a whole lot nicer than it does at the moment. But that's been me running the file over it, find the highs and the lows, knock the highs down, pull the lows up, and keep going. And the terminology file finished would be that you would keep knocking and banging until the file doesn't show any highs or lows. That's all very well and good if you have the skill firstly, but secondly the time in a paid job. In most cases that doesn't happen. If you get within 1 millimetre, time you put your primers on, skimmer filler, the problem's solved. The perfect scenario is to actually have it in all steel, but then you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a car. So I'm going to pull these up a little bit. We might try and grab a bit of footage of that. I said I'd tell you about files. I like a file that's got what I class a single cut, so you can see that's going one way. If you get a file like that one, that's more like a checker where it's been cut both ways, I find these a lot better to use. And then on here it'll tell you on the file what they are. So this is a lathe file, like a fine lathe file. And then I've got others here. So this is a mill bastard file, and it looks very similar. And I've found those pretty good over the years as well. And then if you're doing file finish, I've got another one that takes a file like that, that's very coarse, and it's really good when you're file finishing, but at the same token it takes a lot of metal and it can groove the panel up, and these being new panels, I wasn't going to use that. So that's a proper metal finishing file, and you can hear just how coarse that is. So I like the single cut, like a lathe file, and I've got all different sizes, and try and get a quality brand. It was interesting when I was looking through all the files I've got, they vary from made in Brazil, made in Mexico, made all over the place. The good files used to be like out of England, but I don't see those too much anymore, or something that's probably coming out of Europe. But try and avoid the really cheap Chinese file, because they won't last and you won't get the nice finish that you will out of a decent quality file. So I'm just going to use this. This is another one of my eBay specials. So I couldn't justify a couple of grand for the whole, dent pulling, because I don't do a lot of it. In hindsight, a couple of grand, I probably should have went down that track. You'll see people using a puller, and the puller itself welds onto the panel, and then you pull it, and then they turn it and take it off again. This one here welds a nail onto the panel, and then I've got to pull it and then remove the nail by sanding process, so it's not the perfect scenario. So I'm just going to the middle of this little one here. I'm just going to, it should be enough to stick it on there, and then I'll get my little slide hammer and I need a panel beating hammer. So this hammer's like a flat one, but it's had the outside edge, the radius taken off it, so it's nice and smooth and rounded on the edges. And the reason for that is if it's got a sharp edge, it's effectively could put a dent in the panel. So I'm trying not to have that. So that just clamps onto there. Now what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to run around the outside. And that's a really light tap to try and take some of the tension out of the panel. And what I can do now is get the file. Can't find anything this morning. And while that pin's still on there, so you can see here the file's now touching there, but it's still not touching here. So that, where that's marked that from where it's grabbed the electricity, that's sort of gone down a bit. So I'm just going to pull that pin a bit more and give it a bit more of a tap. And ideally I'm looking to try and have the file mark all of it. Now if I change the angle, you can probably see on the camera there, I can just pull that by hand. See how much that moves? And if I change the angle, it'll pull that side up a bit. So you can see now we're touching here and there. So I know from experience if I sand this off now, when I sand this will be a little bit high. So I will get the majority of that out and it'll probably come out in the primer rather than needing to have filler on it. So I'll just cut that off with a set of side cutters and sand it up. We'll just cut that off. Now I've got the new Merkur grinder with a 120 disc on it. And if I'm lucky, that'll be just sitting up enough that so that the light's showing that a bit, but I can see where I'm touching here and here and here. And when I feel it, there's very little in that. So if I grab the other tool, so this is the orbital battery and I reckon it's got some 120 on it. Just do this so you can see when I run the file over that now. I don't know how that's showing up there now, but pretty much all through here is good, and it's just slightly low where that's actually put some heat into there. It's just pulled the metal down a bit, but I mean it's a very small amount. And I'm happy to leave that like that now because I could keep working it and then get myself into trouble because I've still got a bigger one to do here. So that's the process. You can see there that 120's cut in a bit deep there. So I'll give that a little sand up now. One of the things to try and remember is that if you've got something a little bit deep, when the product goes in it, whether it's epoxy or primer or filler, it means that where that line is, it could come back because the product will shrink, and if it shrinks back into that cut, it'll show a distinct line. But if I smooth that out a bit, it puts the product over a wider area and it won't shrink into that low point and show up later on. It'll more show as a little dip rather than being a line. So one of the things we've got to face is all these little parts. So we've got this little sandblasting cabinet and we either run garnet in it or glass bead. So at the moment it's got garnet. The garnet's quite worn out, so it's a little bit slower than I would like it. But as you can see there, I think these panels might have been dipped or something prior to coming to me, but by sandblasting that, I can effectively blast it, hang it up in the booth and paint it, provided I wear gloves and I don't put my little fingers all over it. So I'm just getting those couple done now because they're part of the front and I'm about to epoxy all of those parts. So just another one. They're reasonably cost effective. I find it works pretty well. Once again, a little bit slow compared to sending it out to a professional blaster. If you've just got a couple of small bits to do, it's pretty handy. So I've got both these doors ready now. So the one hanging up has already been treated with the dioxidine. This one's been sanded with 120 Galaxy paper, and I've cleaned it off now. If you want to see that whole process, the last episode, Terry goes through that whole drawn out process, I guess you want to call it. I'm about to do this one, get it up, and then I'll get some epoxy on these so I can start moving all the parts through the booth and get everything up in epoxy. Just to finalise some of these panels, so the bonnet, this front edge was really ugly, so being a repo panel, I think some of the excess metal is just from the pressing process. So I've gone along and trimmed all that, and it's all looking pretty good now, and I'll probably just fill up these spot welds so that it looks a bit nicer. And I did some other footage of that, so we'll overlay that over. It's getting close now, it's going to need a Scotch Brite and prepped up. The rest of the body, the process now is, my plan is to get the guards, the doors, all the loose panels all into epoxy, and I need to do that so I can then get the shell done, and then we can bolt it all back together so we can start doing the filler work. But as you can see, it starts to fill the shed up. So we've got the inner guards sitting on the floor. They're going to need to be cleaned up as well. There's a little bit of few welds and that on them that need tidying up. And then out in the spray booth, I've still got those doors hanging, but we're starting now to prep these outer panels. So the front panels, they're all been sanded and finished. I'll sand the outside of those now, deoxidine them, deoxidine the outside of the guard. And Steve's just rubbing up the second guard on the inside. So we're doing that whole process the same as in the last episode, which you've seen. And I want to get those into epoxy so that we can move forward, because our next episode will be the filler. Oh yeah, and don't forget, subscribe to the channel, just helps with everything we're doing. If you like what you're watching, share it with your mates. And of course, support our supporters, PPG and Merca. So we'll see you next time.